This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. This show is a great way to get your news fix at the end of the day, but it's also an hour-long distraction to keep you from thinking about how badly you bombed at Wordle. ITL is dual purpose, folks. Here's what we got for y'all on today's show. America has some pretty serious and deep-rooted housing issues, but it can't exactly be summed up in one deep dive. That's why this week, we're spending the next 4 episodes diving into topics like affordable housing, housing discrimination, and so many more. It's all a part of our series, Locked Out. To start off the week, let's lay the foundation, if you will. We're starting off with zoning laws. Let's take a second and envision the typical middle-class neighborhood. I would guess you're seeing pretty decent-sized homes, plenty of yard space, driveways, tree-lined streets. But what are you not seeing? Not a lot of apartment complexes or any multifamily housing. And that image of a middle-class neighborhood isn't by accident, it's by design. In most US cities, zoning laws designate about 3/4 of the city's residential land as areas where you can only build single-family homes. Data company Urban Footprint, that tracks the impact of development in US cities, created custom maps for us to help display this. Looking at these, we can see that 85% of Seattle, 72% of Portland, and 90% of Charlotte is zoned this way. So that's most of the land blocked off for bigger houses, taking up more space for fewer people. So if you can't afford to rent or purchase a single-family home, where does that leave you? These types of laws prevent affordable housing from being built and restrict some people to low-income neighborhoods, creating a clear separation between the rich and the not-so-rich. Sanford Ikeda is a professor of economics at Purchase College and an expert on US zoning policy. He sat down with us to break down these requirements for building in the majority of residential areas.
If the regulations require a larger and larger minimum for either parking or for livable space or the lot size or the size of the unit, and other requirements like amenities and things like that, number of bathrooms that have to be in the unit, minimum size of bedrooms, there are all kinds of regulations in the United States that specify minimums. Well, again, that prices more and more people out as this minimum size gets larger and larger.
So where did the idea of zoning even come from? This concept dates back to the early 20th century. The original purpose was to protect people from things like pollution, for example, creating different categories of zoning like commercial, residential, and industrial, preventing homes from being built next to factories. Within residential areas, certain parts were zoned only for single-family houses. In 1926, a Supreme Court decision upheld zoning laws, which led to keeping townhomes, duplexes, and apartments from going up in a majority of residential areas across the country. That decision ultimately became one way to segregate cities, locking people of color and low-income families out of entire single-family neighborhoods throughout the mid-20th century. The divide between mostly white single-family home neighborhoods and the people of color in lower-income neighborhoods became even deeper because of a practice called redlining, when the Federal Housing Administration outlined black neighborhoods so banks knew not to insure homes there. While civil rights legislation outlawed overt housing discrimination in the late 60s, zoning laws in many cities still make upward mobility tough for those who have been locked out of single-family neighborhoods. That's because being kept out of a neighborhood doesn't just mean being kept out of a single-family home, it also means being kept out of better school districts. And research shows that kids who grow up in communities with more opportunity have better financial outcomes as adults. Zoning has the same kind of impact across a range of opportunities.
I think one way to look at it is not so much, what is it about that area that, causes people to be poor? I think a better way to look at it is what prevents the people who are living in those areas who are low income from moving out and finding better jobs, doing better for themselves, and living in other areas. And so you have to look at the restrictions in other areas that don't allow them to move.
In 2018, Minneapolis became the first US city to remove single-family zoning requirements, followed by states like Oregon and California that passed similar measures. Single-family homes can still be built. These new measures just allow for other types of housing to be built in those areas as well. But as some cities start to do this, some people are concerned about what the future of their neighborhood will look like. In the world of housing policy, those people are often referred to as a part of the NIMBY crowd. also known as Not in My Backyard, for those who haven't heard.
It's a very natural impulse that people have to protect the value of their property or to protect the character of their neighborhood, to have the sort of residential dwellings in your neighborhood, on your block, that have always existed there, right? Most people resist change or will accept change only very slowly.
Our national correspondent, Ben Schamisso, is taking a look at the work Minneapolis has done to ban this type of zoning and the outcomes they're seeing so far.
This brand new duplex represents everything Jana Fliesrand has been fighting for.
I'm extraordinarily and kind of irrationally passionate about building more homes in Minneapolis.
A multi-unit building in a part of town that for years only allowed single-family homes.
If we don't build enough homes for everyone, we know who's going to be pushed out. It's going to be the folks who have the least resources, who have the least power.
As the co-founder of Neighbors for More Neighbors, Fliesrand played a major role in 2018 when her city eliminated single-family zoning, a classification that has long been associated with segregation.
For decades, 70% of the city's residential land was exclusively zoned for detached single-family homes. But now, duplexes and triplexes are allowed just about everywhere.
Minneapolis was the first major U.S. city to approve such a change, and it was hailed nationally.
This is looking at zoning with an equity lens rather than with an exclusionary intent.
But a few years in, not much has changed.
Fully built up neighborhoods that are generally stable socioeconomically don't change that quickly.
Even though construction of duplexes and triplexes has increased since the zoning change, the overall numbers remain largely insignificant in a city of 430,000.
You're talking about purchasing an existing home and then retrofitting it or rehabbing it to make it into a duplex or a triplex. And the economics of that aren't such that a lot of activity is going to happen in a short period of time.
Despite its brutal winters, Minneapolis is a booming city. Its population grew by more than 12% in the last 10 years, but housing construction has not kept pace. As a result, the Minneapolis metro area has the worst housing shortage in the nation, sending rents and housing costs soaring. That means those making less money, a disproportionate number of them being black people, are increasingly getting priced out. Tabitha Montgomery leads the neighborhood association in Powderhorn Park, one of the most diverse areas in town.
Nearly 50% of the community identifies as people of color.
16% of people here live below the poverty line, and 45% of the housing stock is occupied by renters.
The rents in our community have been consistently rising.
The neighborhood includes the site where George Floyd was murdered by police in 2020.
Our desire is to demonstrate that we're not going to forget and that we should have a just and equitable system of practices for all people.
Montgomery says the rezoning and other changes the city is implementing are good steps, but not silver bullets.
We need policies that aim to increase equity, that aims to increase access for housing. We need those to be funded fully.
The zoning change came as part of Minneapolis 2040, a sweeping plan to tackle issues like racial inequalities and climate change. City officials tell Newsy there's a lot more in the plan to fix the housing shortage.
Our strategy has also included allowing more missing middle housing, that kind of 4 units to 20 units range, and larger scale projects along transit corridors.
As for Fliesrand,
My house.
she says her own living arrangement is the driving force behind her activism.
I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunities I've had.
She bought this building in the 90s and has been renting out 3 of the 4 units to help pay for her mortgage.
Living here taught me why it matters if it's legal to build duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or not. This is Game of Zones.
Now she's on a mission to educate others, including me, about how zoning rules impact people's lives. And key to her success,
How can I build a building big enough for all the people on the cards?
she somehow manages to make it fun and accessible.
Thanks to you, I do understand zoning a little more.
Ben Schamisso, Newsy, Minneapolis.